Welcome in, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Your host, Loren Sherman, is a certified financial planner and owner of the flat fee firm Integrity Wealth Management. He curates each episode with you in mind. Whether a work optional lifestyle is on the horizon or you're already there, this show has something for you. With that, listen in, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. I am your host, Loren Sherman, and we are back for part two with Dave Olchowka, who is the founder of Prizm, which helps people review their home and auto insurance, as well as their liability coverage. Part one, we talked kind of big picture about why he created Prizm, a little bit what the process looks like, and some of the importance of reviewing your coverage. So for part two, we're going to get a little more specific into some situations of where this coverage can go right or wrong and how to avoid those situations where it goes wrong. We also talk a little bit through, my wife and I went through this process and how simple it was. It was literally just a few clicks of the mouse, and we were able to review very comprehensively, review our coverage with 30 plus companies and ensure that not only, once again, not that it's all about price, more importantly, that we have the right type of coverage. So from a financial advisory practice, I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to obtain what they refer to as alpha and add a little bit of value to the portfolio. But if we're not protecting the portfolio from some of the unknowns, and that's sometimes where that insurance component comes into play, even though we don't offer that in-house, I think it's really important to review that. I think I also mentioned in the first episode, legal documents, getting those in order is a big piece of your protection. Long-term care planning, even if that doesn't mean insurance, just having the legal structure and the plan in place. So we're big on doing this planning, even when it's not something that we do in-house or we don't have something to sell you. We want to make sure that our clients are protected. Let me think if there's anything else. I think that pretty well covers it. We'll jump right in with no further lead in here. So I hope you enjoy part two with Dave Olchowka, and don't forget to check out the links where you in the show notes where you will be able to go through this review process on your own if you would like. And I think it's really important to do that, even if you haven't, even if you have, I should say, done that recently within the last year or so, because from an advisor's perspective, I kind of only trust the work, so to speak, if our firm has run an analysis of a financial plan. Kind of the same way, same logic here is that we can really only trust the output and the coverage if we know that it was done properly and comprehensively. So the good news is, worst case scenario, you do a review and it turns out that you're in great shape. It's always good to have that confirmation from an independent perspective. So that's all I have for you today. Let's jump into part two, and hope you enjoy. Exactly. Would you say, so I kind of on that line of thinking, are there some common mistakes that you see quite often or areas that get overlooked? And, not to lead you, but one of the areas I kind of feel like I've seen from the outside looking in as an advisor is people not having enough liability coverage, which is a pretty low cost coverage to obtain. But, obviously maybe you have different perspective being in that industry.
Yeah, so not having enough liability is absolute, or any for that matter, is one of the biggest ones that we see, right? Because the mass market carriers, if they're offering an umbrella or you ask for one, they're generally just going to put a $1 million umbrella in place for everybody. But
Sure.
$1 million umbrella, there's more to what an umbrella need than just net worth. And I can get into that a little bit, but some of the other deficiencies that we see all the time, the most common one is the dwelling limit. Over 75% of homeowners are underinsured on their dwelling.
Dwelling limit what that
Yeah.
refers to. Can you
So
expand on
that'd be
that
the
just a little?
cost to rebuild, right? It's that top
Yep.
line number where you say, "Oh, I'm insured for $500,000 if my house burns down, or $1 million if my
Yeah.
house burns down." We see that over 75% of clients, and that's like actually in the industry, over 75% of people are underinsured on their dwelling
Okay.
because mass market carrier tools spit out a number that is based on national averages, builder basic quality, and it's up to the agents or the producers inside those carriers to then start to ask the questions or understand the home to tweak those limits, above average quality, make sure the square
Yeah.
footage is appropriate, doing all the things that we just unfortunately don't see them do because it's at the mass market level, not naming any names of insurance carriers, it's a very commoditized insurance product where they're only trying to win on price. So adding more coverage is not beneficial to them winning a deal,
Right.
right? Whereas we look at things in a very different way where it's let's make sure they're adequately insured properly. Let's make sure we have all the right limits and we put all the right coverages in place. And let's see what that costs and give the client an opportunity to decide whether that's meaningful or not to them.
Is part of the reason why people are underinsured in that department just because home prices continually go up? So you're insured at a certain number and then your home value kind of quickly exceeds that? Or is that part of the reason, or does that adjust as we go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, and
Okay.
I think one of the biggest ones is negligence, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But labor and material costs are different for down to the zip code, and if you don't have a good knowledge of that, you're gonna get it wrong. A lot of insurance carriers, again, they have that basic tool that the agents use that if it's not tweaked, is not going to spit out an accurate number. And if the agent is not doing the work, right, you're going to run into that issue. Um, and it just becomes this like thing. And then as like labor and material continues to increase and outpace that standard inflation clause on a homeowner's policy, you just get further and further away from what that
Right.
true cost to rebuild is. There's so many areas in the country where you can buy a house for less than it would cost to rebuild it today.
Oh, wow.
And you
Oh,
see that.
why is that, would you say?
Well, because market price is very different than labor and material. They're
Okay.
not one and the same. And
I got you.
you think about this happens a lot too in like planned communities, right? Where homes were built at one point at economies of scale.
Okay.
And so the labor and material was much less, and then the market price was set, and the market continues to dictate the price. But with a single
Right.
loss, on one of those homes, when economies of scale are not at play, I don't care. It's like you may have built that home for $600,000 when it was purchased, in that planned community as part of the development, but it's going to be double that today when you're
Yeah,
not
I see what you're
building
saying.
at economies of scale, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense now that you explained that a little bit more. Um, Circling back a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about, we were kind of using the terms synonymously with liability and umbrella. Maybe just taking a step back and kind of level setting of what that is too, because I think I get guilty of this in this industry of using too many acronyms and too many just lingo and kind of forgetting that it's not normal speak for everybody that's not in the insurance or investment world.
Totally. I'm guilty of it too. I get up, I start going, and I just talk about these things like everybody knows about it. But think of an umbrella, excess liability, or an umbrella is exactly how it sounds. It's additional liability coverage over and above all of your underlying risks. So there's a home policy has a liability portion. An auto policy has liability. So if you cause an automobile accident, you are liable for the damages to the person and their property, right? But there's a certain limit that your auto policy is going to cap out at. Your
Right.
homeowner, same thing. Somebody gets hurt on or off your property that you can be held personally liable for. That extends from the homeowners, but it has a limit. So when you have a high earner who's earning $250,000 a year or more in income, maybe has $1 million or more of investable assets, those underlying limits are not enough to protect the balance sheet. So excess liability or umbrella coverage is recommended to go over the top as an additional layer to protect those assets. And it is the cheapest form of asset protection that exists today, right? There's nowhere where you can, anywhere that you can purchase, $10 million of liability coverage to protect your balance sheet for a couple $1,000s a year, right? Like just that it is really the cheapest way to ensure that in a large incident, should you have a youthful driver in your home who goes and causes a very serious accident, you're sued because you're responsible for that driver. Your assets are covered through that umbrella. Now, a court could sue for whatever they want, right? They can sue, but rarely, if a client is insured properly, do we see courts award judgments beyond the insurance limits. If you're not insured properly, then wage garnishments can happen, liquidation of assets. We hear, we get feedback was like, well, what about my protected assets, right? 401ks and things like that. Sure, technically they can't take those assets from you, but if a judgment is passed against you and the only place that those assets live is there, you may be forced to liquidate them anyways to pay the judgment back if you don't want your wages garnished. Maybe you're a financial advisor or somebody else in the financial world or somebody who deals with the public, and there's reputational damage if you have to file bankruptcy, right? There are things that that umbrella can really stop from happening.
Yeah. And it's really one of those where the greater your net worth, the more need for that protection is to kind of put a fence, so to speak, around your assets and protect them.
100%. Because any lawyer in a lawsuit situation can subpoena your balance sheets and see what you're worth, right?
Okay. Right. Anything else that we missed as far as like anything that really stands out of a common mistake that we didn't touch on yet?
Yeah, we see a lot of, little things, and I wouldn't call this very little, but there's endorsements that, with most mass market carriers have to be purchased, one being water backup of sewer and drain coverage. And we see that those are very limited, even when purchased with mass market carriers. And when you have a fully finished basement, which many areas of the country, homes have basements, right? You're subject to water backing up through sewers and drains and sump pump failure. And those losses can be very, very expensive. And we see, a lot of mass market carriers capping that coverage at $10, $25, or $50,000 in coverage. And if you've got 1,000 square feet or more of a basement, that's not going to scratch the surface if you get an inch of water down there. So we see those limits, being missed completely or very limited on homes that need much larger limits in those situations. And that's kind of getting granular, but it's those little things that we dig in and we start to point out those deficiencies that can say, hey, one loss in this one little area could cost you tens of thousands of dollars because you don't have the coverage.
Right. And reviewing coverage like this, every day, you guys have the eye for picking that out right away and seeing where potential deficiencies are. Whereas someone like me from the outside looking in, I could spend all day looking at it and not pick up on, where there might be some gaps.
Yeah, we spot them right away.
Okay. One question that we had was frequency of review. So is it too frequent to say that we should review this coverage annually? Is it more based on when we have big life changes? Do you have like a rule of thumb of how often someone should be reviewing their coverage?
Yeah, so I think if you've gone through a Prizm review, then I have thoughts on that. I can't sort of speak if you haven't, because I don't know what client, what advisors do, when they're reviewing it at a local brokerage or a local farm agency or something like that. But if we do a review, let's say in your situation, we did a review and we provided, some feedback with some tweaks, right? Unless you have a major life event where you buy a new house or your net worth goes through the roof, or, you've got something that creates addition, you buy a rental property or something like that that creates additional risk that needs to, be looked at and make sure everything else is aligned with it, you're probably good, for a review every 2 to 3 years. Um, when you with especially if we've done it. But when you're a Prizm client, we actually do a review every single year. And it's a pretty hands-off review. It's part of what our standard annual renewal process. 60 to 90 days prior to a renewal, a client gets a link, an email with a link that to their annual renewal questionnaire. And we ask them, specific questions about has life changed in any way? Are you planning any renovations? Have you done a renovation that you didn't tell us about? Have you changed your roof or are you planning to change your roof? Any kid drivers in the near future? Things like that, right? Very simple, takes less than 5 minutes, sort of like our risk profile questionnaire, but it gives us some insight into whether or not the client's life has changed year over year. Then 30 days prior to the actual renewal of the program, we send a side-by-side comparison of what their current term is versus what their renewal term is. And as long as they haven't seen any major increases, that are outside what we think is the threshold of a standard increase year over year, we will, we'll recommend that they stay with that carrier for at least a couple of years, right? Okay. But if they see a major increase that we feel is out of line with what, a standard increase should be, we will automatically take that program out to market and assess whether there is a better fit. If there's not a better fit, we'll actually show you the carriers we approach and what the cost was, so there's peace of mind there. If there is a better fit, there's a third column there that says, hey, we think you should move to this carrier for less cost, but no coverage being taken away from you because you saw an abnormal rate increase.
Yeah, I like that. So really no legwork from the client's perspective other than maybe filling out a real quick questionnaire of how has your life changed.
That's right.
So this is really behind the scenes work that you're looking at that.
And we just do that year over year over year. And we CC the advisors on our findings every year. So the advisor stays, in the know on the client's insurance situation as well.
Yeah. And it really hits home when you said, well, when's the last time they've done a Prizm review versus with someone else? I kind of liken that to being a financial advisor. And if someone told me, oh, I just reviewed everything last year, unless it was done inside our firm, I'm not going to fully trust it or think that it maybe went as in depth as what we needed to. So I can relate with your answer of when was the last Prizm review.
Right. There you go. Yeah, I don't trust anybody but our judgment, right?
Right. Yeah, so I guess you've kind of talked about this already, but any stories that you want to share that you had kind of top of mind of, I don't know if you want to call them horror stories from not having the right coverage, or success stories on the other side of the coin of people who have worked with Prizm. Does anything jump to the top of your mind with that?
Absolutely. And I think what I'll do is I'll combine what could have been a horror story with a success story.
Okay.
So that it kind of shows both sides of the coin versus tell one major horror story and one major success story. But, early days of Prizm, we had a financial advisor bring a client to us, had a significant net worth, and he knew that the client was wildly underinsured. So client had over $20 million net worth and a $1 million umbrella in place. Okay. And we did a review. Not only did we agree that the umbrella limits were low for the situation, that not just net worth, but multiple homes were underinsured considerably from a dwelling perspective. So we did a full review, presented it to the client, and the client felt very strongly that we were right in our review and took us up on our recommendations and moved forward with the program. Not only 2 months later, the client lived on a lake in their primary home and rented a boat that had a slide for his daughter's sweet 16 birthday party. And one of the friends went down the slide, hit the lake, and broke her back. Oof. And the family was sued. The lawsuit ended up paying out a little over $3 million off of the umbrella policy. Had we not done that review just 2 months before, that client would have paid more than $2 million out of his own pocket to settle that lawsuit. So
Wow.
it could have been a really bad situation for that client and for the advisor because there's some trust loss there, right? Because the client goes,
Sure.
"Can you make me aware of this? You're the one managing my money, right?"
Sure.
But it turned out good because the advisor identified it. We brought it to the client's attention, and the client took us up on it. Now, think about that in a different way. We do the review, we bring it to the client's attention, and the client doesn't take you up on it. The client has nobody to look at but themselves if a situation occurs that
Yeah, fair.
it had there's because you've presented the options to do a review and we've presented a recommendation to change based on the overall situation. So, I sleep better at night knowing like that we played our role.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that situation, even though the client had enough wealth where they could have written that check for a couple $1 million, I don't think that would have been a very happy check to write.
Yeah.
But
Tell me
also,
anybody who wants to self-insure that way.
right, right. But also, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about what if the client would have had $3 million or something like that, and you're really taking a huge chunk or maybe all of their net worth, or you're going to get into wage garnishment. And
Yeah.
like you said, that's one of the least expensive types of coverage that people can add. So that's certainly one that I think can be very valuable for people to add. And I've seen that a lot too, where people don't tend to have what they should in that department.
Yeah, that's a very overlooked part of an insurance program that is relatively inexpensive for what you get and can save your balance sheet in a terrible situation. Now, we never want to see those claims occur, and they're not as
Right.
common as, say, fender benders, but it only
Right.
takes once, right? And again, for the cost that they are on an annual basis compared to what a client's balance sheet is, it's a rounding error in most cases.
Yeah. Well, before we hit record, we were just talking about the weather that you got in Chicago, and someone could do something as simple as slip and fall on your sidewalk, right? Which, if you don't have time to get out there and shovel it and put salt on it or whatever quickly enough, that crazy enough that we can be responsible for things even like that too, right?
You're 100% responsible. And I've covered those claims with
Yeah.
clients who, you know, a male person has, fallen in front of their house and sued them. And we've seen those claims take, cost a lot of money,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars awarded to these individuals. Little dog bites, right? Not even vicious dogs, like a little schnauzer nips somebody, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things that I've seen and horror stories that I could tell.
Yeah.
I don't like to really tell horror stories to,
Yeah.
you know,
Fair enough.
but it's just like it's everyday life here in this litigious society that we live in.
Right. You talked about mail delivery. These days, it's not just the mailman; it's sometimes at some houses it's 7 days a week with the Amazon packages. So
That's
a lot
right.
more chances for things to potentially go wrong with the number of deliveries that we get.
Yeah. Handyman, if you hire a handyman or a cleaning service, you're responsible for all of those people once they step on your property.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna kind of wrap up. Actually, you popped something into my mind. I got to do real quick here. Uh, you mentioned dog bites.
Ah!
This little dude isn't biting anybody. He's got just about no teeth left. But
Oh. Well,
so
you might be safe with him, but you have
so
other
we
risks, right?
we'll worry about the other risk, but we don't have to worry about him for that piece at least.
Absolutely.
Um, One of the things that I talk about a lot of times in my financial practice of I have three top reasons why people sometimes don't take action. So I think it relates a lot to this as well. So I'm going to just really quickly talk through those and then maybe, how Prism has addressed those. So one, I think, is awareness and people just simply not being aware that there are alternatives. In my world, that's a lot of times awareness of having a flat fee firm, having a firm that does tax planning and things of that nature. I think in your world, it's more awareness that there's someone that can shop real quickly with just a few clicks of a mouse, a bunch of different companies for the right coverage, for the right price. And it doesn't have to be kind of this huge hurdle where you gather all your papers, you drive somewhere, you sit down, and it becomes a huge, like, oh, I don't want to do that type of thing. Um, so awareness is a big deal. I would say apathy is also a big one that we see in our industry. And when I say apathy, I just mean people that might think, I know I could be doing something better. It's just not high on my priority list. Or maybe they haven't thought about the kind of long term compounded effect or the bigger picture consequences. So you gave an example, I think that would relate when it comes to that of having your home insured at 500,000, even if your home's worth 800,000. The apathy there might just be not quite having I think maybe that kind of seeps into awareness too of, hey, not aware that this is that big of a problem. So it's kind of not high on my priority list. And then the third one, maybe the biggest driver of where people have their coverage, in my opinion at least, is simply inertia of where are they at right now. And I think, we kind of all like to think of ourselves as like take charge people, but I'm just as guilty as a lot of people of just staying put with something just because that's where I'm at now, and it would take an action to change. But once again, I think what I've been impressed with Prizm is that you guys have really eliminated a lot of those hurdles where it doesn't have to be a big challenge to make a change, or I guess make a change is even getting ahead of ourselves. The first step is just really a consultative review and seeing where we're at with everything. But, awareness, apathy, inertia, those are the three that come up in the advisory world for me. And I think Prizm has done an awesome job of really lowering or eliminating the hurdles when it comes to each of those three.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's very similar on the insurance side of things as it is in financial services on your side of things.
Yeah.
People really are not aware that better coverage exists, and because you can't purchase these types of programs directly from insurance companies, a lot of times they haven't even heard of these insurance companies, and they're the best, most financially strong insurance companies that exist that people haven't even heard of. And it really is through that partnership with financial advisors that awareness is created. And that awareness has been stunted because of how hard the process has been traditionally, which is what we're really trying to solve for. Everything you just said really resonates with me because we see that same thing on the insurance side of things. But when you make a process easy to engage with and you bring consistency to it and you lead with advice and consultation and not just some sort of product hawking mentality, you start to see people gravitate towards that service.
Do you think that the reason some of those that could be really good companies are not as well known? Do they just not advertise as much? Are they not in the marketing space as much as some other, like everybody's heard of a few certain carriers?
Yeah.
Are some just don't market like the others?
Yeah, because they're not direct to consumer. They have to be purchased through a broker, a specialty broker like me. So they've relied traditionally on the brokers being the one who creates the awareness.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So the ones that you see all over the commercials might be spending their dollars in a different way than, that makes sense.
They're trying to drive direct traffic and write a volume of business regardless of the coverage, right? Whether it's one car or one house or one apartment policy. Those are companies that are looking for volume based business and not delivering any advice and consultation in any way. It's a price driven, commoditized style of insurance. which that's not the market that we're in. We're of the mind of advice and consultation and matching coverage to risk.
Right. Well, as we wrap up here, was there anything that was really important that I missed or that I didn't ask you about, or did we pretty well hit on everything?
I think you did a good job, man. I'm really impressed by the questions, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And, I think for anybody who's listening, they can, if they want to have a chat and they want to reach out, they can go to prizminsurance.io, which is Prizm with a Z. So it's PRIZM in the word insurance.io, and submit a contact us form, and I'll get in touch with them personally to have a conversation.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll be sending out the link for our clients to get their review as well. And you say I did a good job, but the easy part about this for me is that I just rely on all of your expertise. So I really appreciate you joining the show and sharing your expertise with us. So anytime I interview someone, it kind of takes it off of my shoulders a little bit. I just have to ask you the questions.
Yeah, right. You load me up, right? And then I've got to deliver. So, well, I think they go hand in hand, and I really had a good time being here. So I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Well, that will do it for today's show. And for everyone listening, you can find a link to review your coverage in the show notes. So be sure to take advantage of that. And then last, you can find all of our past episodes, just about any podcast app that you use out there. Also, you can visit our website, integrityguidance.com. God bless, and we will see you next time. Thanks, David.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you for listening in and supporting this show. And if you have a moment, we'd love a 5-star review to help this podcast reach even more listeners. Also, this show thrives on feedback from its audience. So if you have any topics you'd like to hear covered or have anyone specific you'd like to see join the show, please email your recommendations to our address, hello@integrityguidance.com. That's hello@integrityguidance.com. We review every email that comes in, and we will do our best to include any recommendations you have for us. Thanks again, and be sure to follow our show so you don't miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Loren Sherman is a certified financial planner and owner of Integrity Wealth Management, a flat-fee firm which serves pre-retirees and retirees in search of their own work optional lifestyle.